I'm so intrigued and inspired by generous families. I spent a lot of time talking about the calling of generosity and what it looks like, and especially for those of us who are leaning into the calling to be generous with our resources and to give and to support others. And of course, I'm exploring this from the vantage point of one who has been on both sides of this conversation, working with organizations and nonprofits that are partnering with other generous people who help support and advance the mission. And then as a person who cares about leaning into and being a more generous person myself and giving to and supporting financially those missions and movements and organizations that really align with my convictions that I think can bless and benefit people in the world in significant ways. And along the way, I've become so fascinated with giving families. So not just individuals. Oftentimes when you think about generosity, you're thinking about maybe it's a husband and wife team who deliberate and explore possibilities and prayerfully consider how they're going to use their resources to bless and benefit others through generosity, through giving, through charitable giving. But every so often I come across a family that does it together. And I've seen several different ways that they do this. And it's so neat to see how much fun they have with it and also how seriously they take it. So I've seen it take multiple forms, and I'll share a few of them with you today. One of them is they create a family foundation. And there are family members who are on the board, and then they schedule quarterly meetings and they receive grants or they explore possibilities together, whether or not they are structured to wait for someone to come to them or they like to go out and to seek options. And different members of the family play different roles. They have different roles and responsibilities. Maybe one is a researcher, one is the person who maintains the primary contact with those that they make charitable gifts to. So they meet regularly and they go through a formal process, and then they vote and they distribute gifts in an agreed upon amount every quarter or every year. And that is pretty intriguing to me whenever I see that happen, that it can be family members and then also other people who are closely aligned with the mission of the foundation over time. And one example that has really intrigued me too is there are families that want this to continue on for generations. But how do they make sure that the original vision for generosity stays front and center and it doesn't deviate for those that consider that to be important? And so as one example, there's a foundation I know of that had the gentleman who really started the foundation with his family and other people who cared about it. And so he created a legacy video that he recorded before he passed away many years ago. And in that video, it's not that long, it's about 10 or 15 minutes. He just lays out why he cares about generosity, why he cares about giving, and why he cares about giving to certain groups and certain causes, and why they're important to him and important to the values that his family holds dear. And in doing so, he's established a vision for the future generations and for whoever will be leading and supporting that foundation in the future. And every single quarter, or in advance of every quarterly meeting, the group is required to watch the video. Or they just take a little bit of time and they recognize it. They remind themselves of why they exist and what they're about and what their priorities are. Before they look at a single grant application or consider a single gift, they're being reminded of why they're here in the first place and why they're giving. And so it's a family initiative. It's still centered upon those initial founding priorities. There's an origin story that's shared and people are reminded of it. So that's one model. But I've also seen other approaches with families. I've seen some families use a family donor advised fund. And you can look that up if you want to learn more about it. I'll eventually create a video on donor advised funds. But for now, a donor advised fund is a fund where you essentially contribute money to this fund. And technically, when you make the contribution, it's no longer your money, it's in the fund, but you get to advise the fund on where the money goes. And generally, the money goes where you advise it. assuming that it fits the parameters of that particular donor advised fund. Usually has to make sure that it's going to a nonprofit, that there's no conflict of interest, things like that. And donor advised funds can have multiple people who are involved in directing the money. It can be a single individual. But I have seen families and talked to families who use a donor advised fund sort of like a foundation, but they don't actually have to form any kind of legal entity. They contribute a certain amount of money, and then they have family meetings, family get-togethers, and they explain how much money is in the donor advised fund, how much they would like to give for that particular quarter or year or whatever time period they use. And then the family just talks about it and deliberates. They might do it in the living room. They might go on a special vacation or a retreat, and it's part of their conversation. Sometimes every person has an assignment to go and to research and to bring one charitable giving idea that they'd like to propose to the family. And they talk about it, they deliberate, they decide together, and then they release the funds from the donor advised fund. And so that's something that I think is really interesting. It works within a given generation. Now, the task of passing on a donor advised fund to another family member after one person passes away, that can happen, but there are some complexities to that. And I am not a lawyer or a financial expert, so I cannot give any advice on that. I'll just say that it would be really good to look into that, pay close attention to make sure that would be the right structure for what you'd want to accomplish. And yet, I've also come across families who do it even more informally, where the family gets together on a regular schedule, maybe it's annually or something of that sort, and there is some kind of family business oftentimes, and the family business generates revenue, and they as a family determine regularly what percentage of that profit they would like to direct toward charitable giving. And again, they have a regular meeting, they talk about it, they discuss it, and they determine which direction they'd like to go together. And there have also been instances, I also know of examples where families get together and it's more of a stone soup approach. So you can check out the story of stone soup. I'll share it here briefly, but it's the story of where there's this man who comes into this town and he puts this big kettle up and he starts a fire and puts water in it and he just puts a stone in it, and people are curious and they come by and they say, "What are you making?" And he said, "I'm making soup." "Well, stone soup. Well, what is stone soup?" And he explains it to them and they say, "Well, you can't just make a soup with a stone. You need to put some potatoes in there." "I have some potatoes. I'll contribute those." So someone goes and gets potatoes, they cut it up, they add it to the soup. Someone else comes and they realize, wait, you need more than potatoes, and they add more vegetables and other things like that. And eventually it's this wonderful soup or stew, and everyone contributed something to that. Well, the family approach to family giving in stone soup is you start with an empty kettle. There's no money to give. And everyone comes in and they each individually decide for a given time period, year or quarter or whatever it is, how much money they would like to contribute to the family generosity stew, if you want to think about it that way. And they contribute, no judgment if some people can give more, some people give less, and they put it all together, but then they decide together how they want to use the money. And it just draws them together as a family. One of the things that I find so fascinating about this is it cultivates a spirit of joy and generosity in the family. The family is creating a tradition that reminds themselves and one another that they have been blessed to be a blessing to others, that what they have been given in terms of resources is an opportunity to be kind and generous to others, to use what they've been given to amplify and enhance things in the world that they believe will be a blessing to others, that will benefit others in a meaningful, tangible way, to meet unmet needs, to do things that others might not have done. And that, I think, is really worth our consideration.